This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 42, a single mom to a bright-eyed 5-year-old girl named Lily, and I've spent most of my life trying to prove I'm more than the shadow my family cast over me. I work as a project manager in a small tech firm, a job I fought tooth and nail to earn after years of clawing my way out of a past that tried to bury me. I've got a sharp tongue, a stubborn streak, and a heart that's been bruised more times than I care to count. But it's still beating. My story isn't one of fairy tales or happy endings handed on a silver platter. It's about taking back what's mine, even if it means leaving my own mother homeless on the street. And trust me, I don't lose sleep over it. It all came to a head the day I stood in front of that old house. The one Dad left me in his will, the one Mom and Rachel had been squatting in for over a decade like it was their birthright. I clutched the eviction notice in my hand, my knuckles white, my chest tight with a mix of fury and something else. Maybe guilt, maybe relief, I couldn't tell anymore. The air was crisp, biting at my skin, and the faded paint on the house peeled like old scars. Karen, my mother, stormed out the front door, her face twisted in a snarl, her voice shrill enough to wake the dead. "You can't do this, Sarah. This is my home. I've lived here 45 years. Her eyes were wild, desperate, but I didn't flinch. I'd seen that look before, when she begged me to pay for Rachel's wedding, when she tried to guilt me into giving up what Dad gave me. "It's my house," I said, my voice steady, cutting through her hysterics like a knife. "You've got 30 days. Get out." She froze, her mouth gaping like a fish out of water, then lunged at me, grabbing my arm. Her nails dug into my skin, and I felt a hot surge of anger bubble up. "You're a monster!" she screamed, loud enough for the neighbors to peek through their curtains. "What would your father think, throwing your own mother onto the street?" That hit me like a punch to the gut. Dad, Michael, the only person who ever saw me. I yanked my arm free, my heart pounding, and leaned in close, my voice low and cold. "Dad left me this house for a reason. Maybe if you'd cared half as much about him as you did your spa days, he'd still be here." Her face crumpled, but I didn't wait for the tears. I turned and walked away, the sound of her sobbing fading behind me. That was it. The line crossed, the bridge burned, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. Let me take you back to where it all started. Growing up, I was the invisible kid in a house ruled by Karen's obsession with my younger sister, Rachel. Rachel's 37 now, 5 years my junior, but back then she was the fragile little princess, born underweight and sickly. I get it. Karen was scared for her. Any mother would be. But that fear turned into a spotlight that only ever shone on Rachel, leaving me in the dark. I remember being 7, sitting at the kitchen table with a plate of cold mac and cheese, watching Karen spoon-feed Rachel like she was still a baby. Rachel was 3, giggling as Karen cooed, "My precious girl, you're so special." I dropped my fork, hoping for a glance, a word, anything. Nothing. I might as well have been a ghost. By the time I was 10, the pattern was set. Karen's world revolved around Rachel's every whim. If Rachel didn't feel like school, Karen called her in sick. If Rachel cried about homework, Karen stayed up late finishing it for her. Me, I was on my own. One day I waited outside school for 3 hours because Karen forgot my dentist appointment. My sneakers were soaked from the rain. My teeth chattered and my stomach growled. When Miss Henderson, our neighbor, found me and drove me home. Karen barely looked up from painting Rachel's nails. "Oh, I thought you'd figure it out," she said, brushing it off like I was some stray cat she didn't need to feed. I stood there dripping wet, a lump in my throat, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Dad was different. Michael Miller was a quiet man, tall with kind eyes and hands rough from years of construction work. He wasn't home much, his job kept him on the road, but when he was, he tried. I'd hear his truck rumble into the driveway, and my heart would leap. "Hey, kiddo," he'd say, ruffling my hair. "Let's get ice cream." We'd sneak off to Dairy Queen, just the two of us, and he'd slip me a crumpled $10 bill. "Don't tell your mom," he'd whisper, a tired smile on his face. I think he knew how Karen treated me, how she poured everything into Rachel and left me scraps. He couldn't fix it, but those moments were my lifeline. Christmas, when I was 12, sticks out like a splinter in my memory. I'd saved up babysitting money for months, hoping to buy myself a bike. But I still asked Karen for one, just to see. Rachel, overhearing, piped up at the last minute, "I want a bike too." Come Christmas morning, there it was, a shiny red Schwinn under the tree, Rachel's name on the tag. I got a pack of socks. "You're older," Karen said when I asked why, her tone sharp. "Save up if you want something." Rachel pedaled around the yard, squealing with delight, while I sat on the porch, socks in hand, my chest tight with a hurt I couldn't name. Dad caught my eye from the garage, his face soft with apology, but he didn't say anything. He never did when Karen was around. High school was when I started to see the cracks. Rachel wasn't just spoiled, she was helpless. Karen did everything for her, from writing essays to begging teachers to bump her grades. One time, Rachel failed a history test and sobbed to Karen about how mean the teacher was. Karen marched into the principal's office, demanding they fix it, claiming Rachel had special needs no one else saw. They didn't budge, but it showed how far she'd go. Me? I worked weekends at the diner to pay for debate club fees, hauling trays of greasy plates while Rachel lounged at home. "If I ever complained," Karen snapped, "you're the big sister. Set an example." I wanted to scream, "What about me?" But I swallowed it, always did. There's this one moment I can't shake. I'd spent weeks on a science project, a model volcano, every detail perfect. The night before the fair, Rachel accidentally knocked a glass of juice over it, giggling as the paper mache dissolved into a sticky mess. I yelled, tears stinging my eyes, and Karen rushed in, not to help me but to hug Rachel. "She didn't mean it, Sarah. Don't be so selfish." I stood there, fists clenched, staring at the ruins of my work, my throat burning with rage. That was the night I decided I'd leave the second I could. College was my escape. I got into a state school 3 hours away, packed a duffel bag, and didn't look back. Karen didn't even say goodbye, just waved from the couch as Rachel whined about some petty drama. For the first time, I could breathe. I didn't have to compete with Rachel or beg for scraps of attention. I studied hard, landed a job after graduation, and built a life that was mine. Rachel, meanwhile, stayed glued to Karen's hip. She didn't move out until she was 26. And even then, it was only because she married Tom, a mechanic with a temper and a soft spot for her helpless act. Karen still hovered, calling her 5 times a day, showing up unannounced with groceries or to tidy up. Tom hated it, but Rachel never said no. I kept in touch with Dad. He'd call me from his truck, his voice crackling through the line. "How's my girl doing?" he'd ask, and I'd tell him about my latest project or a funny coworker. He'd laugh, a warm, gravelly sound that made me feel seen. He visited when he could, driving hours just to take me to dinner. Karen, she'd comment on my Facebook post now and then, "Happy birthday" or "cute dress." But it was hollow. I didn't care. I was free. Then came the call that changed everything. 11 years ago, Dad's cough started, a dry, nagging thing he brushed off as allergies. I'd nag him over the phone, "Go see a doctor, Dad." But he'd chuckle, "I'm fine, kiddo." Weeks turned into months, and he got worse, tired, breathless, a shell of the man he'd been. Karen didn't notice, too busy with yoga classes and spa trips. Rachel was back home by then, her marriage to Tom already crumbling. But she didn't care either. I was 300 miles away, building my career, when Dad's voice on the phone grew faint, shaky. "I'm okay," he lied, and I knew he wasn't. When he collapsed one night, coughing so hard he couldn't breathe, they finally took him to the hospital. "A lung infection," the doctor said. "Bad." I dropped everything, drove 6 hours through the night, my hands trembling on the wheel. I walked into his room and nearly broke. He was propped up in bed, pale and frail, an oxygen mask over his face. Karen and Rachel weren't there. They'd gone for manicures. I found them later in the lobby, laughing over lattes, shopping bags at their feet. Karen saw me and tried to hug me, but I stepped back, my jaw tight. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Errands," she said, like it was nothing. I wanted to slap her. I stayed with Dad for weeks, sleeping in a hard chair by his bed, talking to doctors, managing his meds. Karen popped in sometimes, but she'd fidget, check her phone, then leave. Rachel barely showed, said it was too hard to see him like that. One night, I held his hand as he slept, his breathing shallow. He woke up, looked at me, and whispered, "I see you, Sarah. I appreciate you." Tears burned my eyes, but I smiled. "I love you, Dad," I said, and he squeezed my hand, weak but firm. He died a few months later. I was there along with his nurse, Jessica, and a couple of his old buddies from the site. Karen was at some wellness retreat. Rachel was out partying. I called them both when the end was near, left voicemails, but they didn't pick up. At the funeral, Karen played the grieving widow, sobbing to her friends about how sudden it was. Rachel wailed like a bad actress, but her eyes were dry. I stood by the casket, numb, my heart a lead weight in my chest. A few weeks later, Dad's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, called me in. I expected maybe a keepsake, his watch, a photo. Instead, he slid a stack of papers across the desk. "Your father left you everything," he said. "The house, his savings, all of it." I blinked, stunned. "Karen and Rachel?" I asked. "Nothing," he replied, his voice even. I sat there, the words sinking in, a mix of gratitude and dread washing over me. Dad had seen me, really seen me, and this was his way of saying it. Karen and Rachel lost it when they found out. Rachel stormed into the lawyer's office, screaming, "Dad wouldn't do this to me." Karen called me that night, her voice dripping with venom. "You owe us, Sarah. Split it." I said no, hung up, and blocked her. I let them stay in the house, though. Stupidly, I thought they might change. They didn't. Karen rented out a room to cover her bills, acting like she owned the place. Rachel spread lies to our cousins, saying I'd manipulated Dad. I let it slide, moved to the city, met my husband, David, and had Lily. Life was good, until Karen showed up again. She knocked on my door one day, unannounced, looking older, frayed. Lily was napping, and I froze, my stomach twisting. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaking her mascara. "I messed up with you. I want to know my granddaughter." I didn't trust her, but I let her in, cautious. She sent Lily gifts, called sometimes. It felt normal, almost nice, until the hints started. "Life's been hard since you took everything," she'd say, her tone casual but pointed. I ignored it, hoping she'd drop it. She didn't. A month ago, she called, chipper and fake. "Rachel's getting married again," she gushed. I hadn't spoken to Rachel in a decade. Her first marriage to Tom tanked fast, but Karen rambled on about how special this wedding was. Then came the ask. "She deserves a nice day, Sarah. Can you help with the mouse? Your dad left you so much." I laughed, bitter. "Am I even invited?" I asked. She stumbled. "Well, we thought you'd be busy with Lily, but you're welcome." I cut her off. "No, I'm not paying." She flipped, guilt-tripping me. "You're the big sister. You should help." Then threatening, "If you don't, Rachel's day will be ruined, and it's on you." I hung up, blocked her again. She kept at it. Voicemails, texts, sob stories. "Rachel booked the venue, the band, everything. We'll look like fools if it falls apart." I shot back, "How'd you plan it if you can't pay?" Her answer, "We counted on you." That was it. I was done. David backed me. "They'll trash talk you." But you're right. He was spot on. Cousins called, saying, Family, Sarah, help them out." I ignored them. Karen's last voicemail hissed, "If you can live with ruining your sister's wedding, you're not who I thought." I deleted it, my hands shaking but my mind clear. That's when I decided to take the house back. They'd lived there rent-free too long, treating me like a doormat. I called Mr. Peterson, got the eviction papers, and served them. Karen's meltdown was epic, screaming, crying, clawing at me. Rachel jumped in, calling me greedy, heartless. I stood my ground. 30 days, I repeated, walking away as their curses echoed behind me. Karen tried every trick. Tough talk. "I dare you to kick me out," and then begging, "I'm too old to start over." She even pulled the dad card again. I didn't budge. On day 26, she moved in with Rachel, who made a big show of saving her, whining to everyone about my cruelty. I hired a manager, fixed the house up, and rented it to a sweet family, Mike and Lisa, friends of a friend. Seeing it cared for felt like a weight lifting off my chest. Rachel's wedding? A bust. She promised Chris, her fiancé, a lakeside blowout banking on my money. Without it, they settled for a drab town hall. Chris was pissed. He hadn't wanted a big thing anyway. Karen moving in made it worse. She nagged him constantly. His cooking, his job, even how he folded laundry. Rumors flew. Chris gave Rachel an ultimatum. Her or me. Rachel picked Karen and Chris walked out. Karen got booted from Rachel's place after a blowout, tried crashing with cousins, but they kicked her out too. She emailed me, begging to come back. I didn't reply. Now I'm here, Lily giggling in the backyard, David planning our first real vacation. The house brings in steady rent, and I'm free. Karen's bouncing between relatives, Rachel's marriage is crumbling, and I don't care. They made their beds. Me, I'm finally sleeping in mine. So here's what I want you to take from this. You don't owe anyone your soul, not your family, not your past, not the people who drain you dry and call it love. I spent years bending over backwards for Karen and Rachel, thinking if I tried hard enough, they'd see me. They never did, and that's on them. You've got one life, and it's yours to claim. Don't let guilt or blood tie you to a sinking ship. I took back my house, my peace, my power, and I'm not sorry. Maybe that makes me cold to some, but to me, it's survival. It's justice. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think? Was I too harsh kicking Karen out after all those years? Should I have paid for Rachel's wedding, kept the peace, or did they get what they deserved? Drop your thoughts below. I'm curious. This story's been a wild ride, and I couldn't have told it without you listening. If it hit you, if it made you feel something, anger, relief, whatever, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone stuck in their own version of my mess. Let's get this channel growing, because I've got more to say, and I know you've got stories too. Thanks for being here. Let's keep this going.